Hello adults, welcome to the third video in our series where we're looking at Bible stories from Genesis during Lent. So today we're going to talk about Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau are the twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah. Isaac is the son of Abraham and Sarah. And Isaac and Rebekah had almost as hard a time getting pregnant as Abraham and Sarah did. I find it interesting that both Abraham and Sarah, and now Abraham and Sarah's son Isaac and his wife Rebekah, both had trouble having children. The text tells us that when Isaac was around 40, he and Rebekah got married. Did not have children very quickly, and not until about 60. Until Isaac was about 60, did they have children. And then they had these two children. Now Rebekah could tell from the very beginning that these children were fighting in their womb, in her womb. She cries out to God, "What's going on?" And God says, basically, these two boys. You're going to have boys. You're going to have twin boys. These two boys are going to be the father of rival nations, and they're already fighting. When these children were born, these two boys were born. First out came Esau. He was very hairy. He was very red. And so they named him Esau because the name Esau sounded like their word for red. And coming right out behind him was Jacob grabbing onto Esau's heel. And so they named him Jacob because in Hebrew it can mean one of two things. Either he takes by the heel is the way that you could translate the word or the name Jacob, or he supplants. And a bit of foreshadowing in the text. Quite fun, I think. I always love it when the biblical text names people a certain way to tell you what kind of person they're going to be. It's like in the old westerns. You always know the villain because he's got the black hat on. You always know the hero because he's got the white hat on. It's just the way it is. It's the same way in the biblical text. Once you find out what someone's name means, by and large, you can find out who they are. You can find out what they're there to do. It's not terribly hard once you know some of those things. So these boys have been fighting back and forth throughout their entire life. Now here's the interesting thing. The interesting thing is that the text says there in verse 28 of chapter 25, here's what the text says. It's very simple, very straightforward. Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, and Rebekah loved Jacob. Isaac liked Esau because he was fond of game, and Rebekah loved Jacob. Very straightforward. What we've got here is we've got an issue of parental favoritism. I've got 4 boys myself, and I love each one of them. And yes, and those of you who are parents, you know that you are tempted to love one child or prefer one child over the other, and it's a very, very big struggle. But one of the things that I think is important to lift out of the text, one of the things that Griggs and March point out in this text, which I think is an absolutely brilliant piece of analysis, is that from the very beginning, these two boys, Esau and Jacob, they were kind of set up to be at odds. As the children grew up, Dad liked one, Mom liked the other. Dad liked one because he did this, and Mom liked the other because he did this. From the very beginning, they were set up to be at odds with one another. And so it really should not surprise us at all that as they move through their lives, and especially some of the different scenes that we find these two brothers in, we're only going to take one of them today, but it should not surprise us that as they grow up and as we've surveyed these scenes, that they are at odds with one another, and they are trying to compete with one another. They're trying to outdo one another. So what happens? What happens in the story that we're dealing with today? Well, Esau goes out. He goes out to hunt. He must have been gone for quite a while, and it must have been very, very bad. He must not have gotten anything, or he must have killed only enough to eat as he was gone. Or maybe he didn't even have that, because as he came back, he was so hungry. He was famished. He was starving. Now, when he shows up, Jacob is cooking a big pot of stew, and it names that it's a reddish stew, which I think is very, very interesting, given Esau being reddish, being very ruddy colored. And here Jacob is making this stew. I love the way that the Bible does this sort of thing. Now, we don't know if this was coincidence, if Jacob saw him coming over the hillside. The text doesn't tell us any of those things. It's fun to play with either side. It's fun to play with what was going on in Jacob's head. Was he trying to take it? Did he premeditatively try to take advantage of his brother, or did he just seize onto a situation? Either way, I find it fascinating. fascinating. But what we do know is that Esau shows up. Jacob is there. He's got the stew. Esau comes up and says, give me some of that. Give me some of that. I'm so hungry. And Jacob takes advantage of the situation. I will be happy to give you some of this stew, he tells his brother. But in reward or in payment for a bowl of this stew, you have to give me your birthright. You have to give me your birthright. Now, birthright was a big deal. Birthright sets you up. It was important to be the firstborn. I'm the firstborn in my family. And these days, it's not really all that important. There's nothing special that I get because I'm the firstborn in my family. It doesn't mean that my brother, who is the fourth of 4 children, gets anything less. I've got 2 sisters that are between my brother and I. Honestly, the sister that comes right after me, she's probably more the firstborn of this family than I am, just given her personality type and the gifts and skills that God has given her and the way that she takes care of the rest of us. She's probably more of that type A, in control, not controlling, but in control firstborn. She's probably more that way. So it doesn't really matter these days who is or who is not the firstborn. But in the ancient times, it was a very big deal to be the firstborn. So if my family lived in the ancient times, the fact that I was the firstborn meant that I got more of the inheritance. I got more of the stuff. I got more of the estate than anyone else did. That's what that meant. It means that I was set up for life. I would be set up for life a lot easier than my sisters and my brother would be. And so Jacob knows this. So here comes Esau. He's starving. He didn't do very well. He's out on the hunt. Jacob, give me the bowl of soup. Fantastic. I'd be happy to do that. But you have to give me your birthright. And Esau, in his famished state, in his desperate state for something to eat, sure, fine. What do I care? My birthright's not going to be any good to me if I'm dead. And if you don't give me anything, I'm going to be dead anyway. Now, how melodramatic is that? I absolutely love it when characters in the Bible just go off the wall. We don't often read the biblical text that way, but these are real characters. They represent real people, and they go off the wall. Well, Esau was just off the wall. He was out of his mind. You know what it feels like when your blood sugar has dropped, you haven't had anything to eat, you're mad because you haven't been successful in the things that you have done, and somebody's saying, yeah, you're just not thinking clearly, and so he gives up. He gives up his birthright. Jacob makes him promise, and he promises, and he gives up his birthright. And what does it say? That as he left, he wolfed down the food. Right? He ate it so very quickly, and then in verse 34 it says he was walking away, despising the birthright, despising the birthright. So. A few things come to mind. A few things are clear to me in this text. One, Isaac and Rebekah didn't really help their kids out too much. They didn't really help their kids out too much. This preferential treatment. Now, again, I don't want to suggest that that we don't have preferences in things. Right? For instance, birds of a feather do flock together. That's just a reality of life. I myself, I'm a theology geek. I'm a tech geek. I like music. I like arts. I like those kinds of things. And so I tend to find myself around people who enjoy those kinds of things as much as I do. On the opposite side, though, I'm not really. You all know me. I don't really understand a lot of sports. I don't understand the appeal of sports. I appreciate the athleticism. I appreciate the strategy. When I sit down and talk to someone and they explain to me the strategy, like I've got a friend who has explained to me why a baseball coach would do certain things or have his players do, and I find that to be fascinating. But on the whole, yeah, it's fine. I could. I've rarely watched the Super Bowl. I don't really watch the World Series. It's just not my thing. So I do have preferences. I do find myself aligning myself with other people. But there's something instructive here in this text about these two parents, Isaac who loved Esau because he was a hunter, and Rebekah who loved Jacob because well, we don't. It doesn't say why because, but we assume if the Bible is saying Isaac liked Esau because of this, then it must have been the opposite. So what would be the opposite? Maybe Jacob was more of a home tender. It was obvious in the text that he had learned how to cook. By and large, that was a woman's job in those days. Not that men couldn't cook, but in the family situation, the men would go hunt, the women would cook and care for. So we assume maybe that Rebekah preferred Jacob because he found himself more in line with those kinds of things. So maybe what's happening is these parents are setting these children up based on some stereotypes. But what it's teaching them, so I'm not wanting to suggest that we can't have preferences, but what I find instructive in this text is that we've got these parents who are setting these children up almost for failure, because they are demonstrating to them this is preferred or this is preferred. And it already tells us in the text that these kids were fighting in the womb anyway. They're already predisposed to fight with one another. I think the way that we structure and the way that we organize ourselves is a very important lesson that we can take from this section. Not just in our families, but in our entire life, in our church life, in our family life, in the way that we live our lives. Those of you who are in charge of other people, we can set things up in such a way that either A, people fight with one another, or B, people cooperate with one another. We can do that. We can provide a situation in which people think that they must fight with each other or they will not be taken care of, or we can set up a situation in which everyone knows that they can be taken care of, that they will be taken care of, that the best thing to do is to work together. I mean, think about it. If opposites really do attract, if it is preferable for two people who have different sets of skills to work together, think about the powerhouse that Esau and Jacob could be, right? I mean, Jacob has learned a lot of things about the care of a place. He has learned from his mother how to cook, obviously. So there's something about him that is good about being attentive to those kinds of details. On the other hand, Esau has got some gifts and skills where he is large, he's very athletically built, he's obviously a good hunter. And in those, sociologically, physiologically, biologically, we know that he's probably got a whole lot of testosterone. He's probably very good at taking those kinds of risks to secure food. If those two boys could have worked together, wow, right? I mean, that would have been amazing, the kinds of things that they could do in their life as, these two brothers of Isaac, of Isaac and Rebekah. People would have looked up to them. People would have stood in awe of them, wanted to be like them, but instead they were in an environment where they were taught to compete against one another, where you have two sets of gifts and skills, and one is better than the other. That's very, very unfortunate. That is very unfortunate. So the question that I have to ask myself and that I would offer to you is, in those places of influence, those places where you get to set the terms, where you get to set the tone, where you get to set things up, either for good or for ill, how are you setting it up? What kind of environment are you contributing to? And it's not just that you have to be in charge in order to set that tone, right? I mean, we can do this in a lot of different ways. How do we set the tone in the places where we are? How do we ensure that people understand that it is more beneficial for us to come together than to compete with one another? That to me seems to be the biggest lesson that I'm taking from this short little study in chapter 25 about Jacob and Esau. I have a responsibility to make sure that at a very real level we get along, that people understand that the ultimate point of this is to get along. Well, I hope you're having a great Lent. I hope that these short videos, well, maybe not so short, 15 minutes, I don't know how short that is. I hope that these videos are helping. I hope they're giving you a good perspective on what it means to have been created in God's image, what these stories of the first families of our faith are all about. I hope that they are very helpful. So I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next time.